Hi and welcome. When I was in grad school or even in undergrad, I was taught that if you have a plate with a hole in it and you pull on that plate uniaxially, there will be a stress concentration about 3 at the edge of the hole. I was also told that if you have an infinite volume of material with a spherical hole in it, the stress concentration was 2. Well, this sounds very useful, of course, but it turns out it's not quite true. And there are many real cases where this is absolutely way too high. And today I'm going to show you what's really going on in this type of problem. So if we go to Wikipedia and we take a look at this answer here, we see a plate with a hole in it. For circular holes with an infinite plate, then the stress concentration is 3. And in some cases that is obviously true, but in many real cases that's far from true. One obvious problem here is that it refers to an infinite plate, and real materials are not infinite in size. If you have a smaller plate and the width is smaller than infinite, then the stress concentration goes down. And this is from a website that I found that talk about a very specific equation that you can use to calculate the stress concentration in a plate with a specific size. And of course, another thing to mention is that the stress concentration for a hole in a plate also depends on how the plate is loaded. I will only focus on uniaxial loading here today. So to test this out a little bit, I created a finite element model of a plate. And this is the geometry that I looked at. You can see the sizes here. So it looks like a really small hole in a pretty large plate. And we know from theory on the previous page that if you put in the specific width of this plate, the stress concentration according to the theory is 2.88, not 3, 2.88. But what does the finite element simulation say about this? Well, if I put in a Young's modulus, a linear elastic material model, and apply a strain of 0.2%, and I put in a bunch of higher order quadratic elements here, I get a stress concentration factor of about 2.81. So not too far from the textbook value that was 2.88. Pretty close. One can argue that it's pretty understandable why this finite element solution is a little bit lower than 2.88, because you need a very, very fine mesh to resolve the stress at the maximum location. But we have missed something here, and this is really what I'm talking about. The big thing that's missing here is really, really important. And that is what I'm going to show next. So let's talk about the real material. So this just picked a material called PTFE. It's a Teflon material. This is a calibrated material model called the polyumal TNV model. I did all of this in M-calibration, our software. The experimental data for this Teflon is available. That comes with M-calibration. I just calibrated this material model to this data, and this is what I got. And then I went back and I simulated in this abacus simulation. In this case, could have been ANSYS, that is Dyna, whatever you care about. You simulated this specific hole in a plate to see what the stress concentration factor is. And this is what I see. So if you look at this, the y-axis is the stress concentration factor. X-axis is how much strain I applied on this plate. So if I don't apply any strain and the limit when the strain goes to 0, we get the stress concentration factor of 2.8 something according to theory. So it works. But take a look. If I apply a little bit of finite strain, the stress concentration factor goes down a lot. If I do 1% strain on this plate, in this case, I get a stress concentration factor of 1.9. It's nowhere near 3. If I do 2% strain, I get a stress concentration factor that is almost 1.5. So that is half what the textbook value is. So the point is, the stress concentration factor is obviously also very strongly dependent on the material itself, the material model, and how much strain you apply. And that's of course because of the material is viscoplastic. In real life you get not a linear elastic response that this closed form equation that people keep talking about is based upon. In real life that is not true. You get viscoplasticity, and that brings down the stress concentration factor tremendously. But on the other hand, we can use this finite element simulation to also look at the strain concentration factor. How much higher is the strain at the edge of the hole compared to far away? It starts at 2.88 according to theory at small strains. But then it goes up a lot. So at 2% applied strain, we get a strain concentration factor that's 4.5, substantially higher than what the textbook value is. So there's a lot to think about here, right? Just simply using these textbook values for stress concentration factors doesn't necessarily apply at all if you have more than 1% strain and you have a polymer material of any kind. You tend to have a much lower stress concentration factor, but on the other hand, the stress strain concentration factor will be higher. So this is important to keep in mind as you use these rules of thumb, because you can get into a lot of trouble otherwise. If you have any questions about any of this, you can ask them below.